Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. I'm John Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and I'm so thankful to have you joining us on this week's episode. We've got a special guest by the name of Kevin Elworth, and Kevin is not only a pastor, he's also a business coach and a leadership expert. And one of the themes of our podcast today, we're going to title this episode, Ask the Better Question. And Kevin's going to share a story about how in a season in his ministry, he began to ask a better question in regards to his income. And that question simply was this: where do we get our income as pastors? If you just accept the traditional model that many of us have been handed in pastoral ministry, the answer is simple. It comes from the church, which is received from the giving of God's people. That has been an answer. I don't know how well that has served pastors in the church, but what if we asked a better question? And that's what we talk about, because if we keep asking the same less than awesome questions, we're going to keep getting the same less than awesome results. If we want different results, we can ask better questions. And so that theme and a bunch of other great stuff is coming your way in this conversation with Kevin Elworth. I'm grateful to have you joining us. Let's get to the conversation. Here we go. Well, Kevin, I'm going to go first and welcome you to the EntrePastors podcast. Welcome to the show, my friend. And then you can turn around and welcome me and Les to your podcast.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to welcome you to my show today as we kind of do this co-interview type setting. Never done this before, but I think it should be exciting and work quite well.
Yeah. So for our guests on both sides that are thoroughly confused right now, let me explain what we've got going. So Les and myself wanted to bring Kevin as a guest on our show, and he in turn wanted to bring us as a guest on his show. And we ended up booking like back-to-back interviews. And I thought this is going to get confusing if we're going to forget what brilliant thing we just said the hour before. So I said, why don't we both interview each other at the same time? We'll end up just having a really good conversation about some of the themes that we're talking about. And so at either point, we all have the right to just grab hold of the interviewer hat and say, hey, I have a question. So thank you, Kevin, for letting us be a guest on your show. And we're glad to have you as a guest on ours as we break all the rules of podcasting and create 2 episodes in one fell swoop. This is awesome. I don't know if this is
I think it's done. I think it's genius. So let's do it, man. Let's get into it.
Awesome. Well, let me ask the first question and just say, Kevin, tell us a little bit about your journey into pastoral ministry and what that's looked like for you. And then you get to ask the next question.
I love it. My wife and I, we've been married for 21 years and ministry the entire time. Went into like full-time ministry as we graduated from college. And so we've been on the mission field for a while, went into pastoral ministry after that. We did that for 14 years or so and kind of came to a big confrontating stop at the beginning of last year where we had to make a change out of ministry or out of like pastoral ministry. And so I resigned my position, became a leadership development person, and started working alongside of pastors to be able to help level up leadership. Because I'm recognizing, man, there's a big deficiency when it comes to leadership in churches today. So walking down that path, also doing some of that with the business community as well. But I'll be honest with you, I think the thing that really drew my attention to you guys and this EntrePastors thing was the fact that I started asking the question about finances in ministry about 6 or 7 years ago, recognizing the fact that ministry can never keep up with the requirements of life today, like inflation and the cost of living and all those things. And to get to the spot where you want to get in life, the church just can't play that game.
Yeah, most can't, for sure.
It begs a new question. Where does our money come from? And so we started wrestling with that and adding some streams of income and still kind of just continued on that way. And then ultimately, when it came to that spot where I felt the Lord telling me, hey, your time in ministry is done, but still kind of that pending, well, okay, God, that's cool, but what now? I was able to give up the largest part of my paycheck, but not all of it. And man, that was huge to be able to say, all right, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next. And this is the element of like, let's get out of the boat and walk on the water for a minute and see what happens. And I could because I still had some cash rolling in. So in my quest to meet and engage in some pastors around the community today, I keep bumping into people that are like, man, you gotta check out this EntrePastors network thing that's going on. And
No,
and
we love
so
that.
yeah, you got a
That's good.
following out there, and it's a pretty big deal.
Great.
Well, thank you. And yeah, that's exactly for your audience, for your listeners. That's exactly the thing we do at EntrePastors. We help pastors figure out how to provide better for their families. I agree 100% with what you said, Kevin. Much of the time, and I believe it's going to continue to be the case more of the time, the church just is not set up to provide well for a
Right.
pastor's family. One of the ways we say it at EntrePastors is that we are sick and tired of the narrative of the starving pastor, this idea that to be in pastoral ministry, we just all kind of accept the fact that, well, welcome to being broke, welcome to living paycheck to paycheck, barely getting by. I make the case often that our church people as a whole, I'm painting with a broad brush, don't have a category in their mind, their frame of thinking of a pastor who's thriving financially. There's something almost repulsive about that to us. We don't ever really come right out and say it. We're very comfortable with the thought of a pastor who's poor and struggling financially. That fits our framework for kind of what we've known pastoral work to be. And I don't even think that comes from a mean place most of the time among Christians. I just think it's kind of the system that we've created. And, so yeah, Les and I in our own journeys have kind of bumped into this and said, not only have we figured out a healthier path for ourselves, in doing so, we're like, this is too good to keep to ourselves. We really want to share this with a whole bunch of other pastors. So I'd love to get into your story a little bit. Take me back to that place where you are still in full-time pastoral ministry and bumping it. You're starting to ask a new question. You're saying, where does our money come from? What were some of the things in your journey? And you don't have to go deep into like personal details, but what were some of the frustration points, the pain points that had you and your wife, having these kinds of conversations? Because I think a lot of pastors have these thoughts. Some say them out loud, at least to their spouse. Very few say them out loud to anyone else. And so I'd love to just,
100%.
let you say what other people are thinking right now.
100%. And I think we have that opportunity is to be able to say what no one else feels the ability to say. So there was just these little markers along the way. A year into my pastoral ministry here. So we moved here from Mexico, and what's like the age-old slogan? You can live like a king on next to nothing in Mexico, right? And so part of that's true. And so I had a figure in my mind. It's like, if I get a job, I would need X amount of dollars. My number was 50,000. They offered me 50,000 bucks. I was like, we won't need anything forever. And then we moved here and they offered me 52,000. And we moved here and I realized I can barely survive on 50 grand. And even though I felt like that was a good amount of money, I had no equatable logic for how expensive it was to live in this area of the country. And so when we got
Real
up here,
quick, let me just pause you real quick. Explain the context. Where is here that you moved to when you were coming? Why were you in Mexico?
So that's where we were missionaries at.
Okay.
And when that came to an end, we found a pastoral position in South Central PA, which is where I still am.
Okay.
And so, I don't know that there's any cheap place in the country anymore today, but that was kind of the feeling of what it came to. And we were living in this super small house. Our heating bill over the winter was like $1,000 a month, and it was just unreal. And so when we moved out of that spot, I remember having a conversation with my wife about 6 months into it, saying, if we don't get about $1,000 a month more, we're not going to survive. We're going to be done with this. And so I watched my wife as she kind of, as she, I mean, she had the ability to do this, but she's very entrepreneurial in her nature. She pulled together like a little daycare and started watching kids and started really, really helping our family get out of the grind of life, by being able to provide some of these financial resources that we lacked. And honestly, it never stopped. From that point on, it was like, all right, where's the next avenue of funding coming from? And But then there was also another time, another marker. I remember sitting down with another one of the pastoral staff, and we're wrestling. It's right before Christmas time, and one of the pastors had said, "Hey, who are the needy families in our community that need help for Christmas?" And I was like,
Oh, mine.
"How do I put my name in there? Because
Oh,
we're
wow.
going to struggle this Christmas." And I did. It was so emotional for me to say that, but I didn't have any place to say that to. Because
Mm,
where does the pastor turn when the pastor needs help? Like,
wow.
there's no venue for that.
Wow. Man, that's I, I think a lot of pastors just felt that viscerally across our listening audience. Like
Mhm.
they've lived that and or some version of that story. I know I certainly have. It's interesting. A while back, I'm going to use this as fodder for a Facebook post in the near future. In a group of pastors that on Facebook that I've found sometimes is some of the meanest places on the internet. I had a pastor
Mm.
call me out when I was talking about these very subjects and basically said, essentially, I don't remember the exact wording. I copied it and pasted it. I will use it at some point. But he basically said, don't pretend like this bothers you, that pastoral poverty bothers you. You're just trying to make money off of this. And it's laughable on so many accounts. But I responded and I said, bro, this is deeply personal to me. I was that struggling pastor
Oh
for
man, yeah.
years. I grew up in it. My dad was a pastor, and as was Les's dad. I mean, he comes from a ministry family as well. And like I saw my parents struggle financially. And when I surrendered to a calling to pastoral ministry and to preach the gospel, not only did I surrender, I told the Lord that, and I agreed to not have any money. And it took a lot of years for God to get through to me. John, I never asked for that second part. You offered that up freely on your own to be broke. I never said you had to be broke, but that was my model. And so I take these stories when I hear a story like what you just shared, man, it's fuel to me to go, we got so many pastors struggling needlessly. And I believe there's easy solutions. Like easy might not be the right word, simple solutions to help fix these problems. But it starts with rethinking the paradigm of what we've viewed and how we viewed pastoral ministry to look like. So tell me a little bit more as you started to recognize, not only do we need to add some streams of revenue to our family, but now you're taking steps forward in doing that. Was there a struggle for you or your wife as you guys were starting to like think entrepreneurially and thinking outside of the church salary? Like,
Mhm.
were there any kind of mindset things that held you back on, ooh, I don't know if it's okay for us to make an extra $1,000 a month?
There never was. I never had that struggle. It just became a fight or fight or flight mentality. We're either going to do this or we may not survive. So it came through a peculiar way for me. And I want to kind of insert this because it is an opportunity that anybody has, and it actually fills a huge biblical need. We processed into foster care, and we did that because we couldn't have any more kids. We had one child that biologically, and then we just had this aching part on our heart that said, "Hey, we're not done yet, but my wife could have no more kids." So we started asking the question about, "Hey, what about foster care and adoption through that means?" And we didn't realize that that was going to actually help answer two questions. It was going to provide for us in a way that we didn't even realize was a thing, and then it was actually going to lead to us adopting four more kids. So that was
Wow.
beautiful. And then it answered another question beyond that, because when we're a little bit naive when it came to this, but I mean, we knew that foster care came with a financial component to the other side of it. I didn't realize that foster care also has like an adoption subsidy that continues until these kids are 18 years old, which became a huge help to us in the place of our life. And please don't hear what I'm not saying. This is not that wasn't a financial decision. It was a decision to like, hey, we need to love these kids. There's a lot of them in our community. Our family can help with this right now. And that was just a byproduct that we didn't even see coming. But that was just the first facet of it. I mean, along the way there, 2019, we added a rental property to our mix, and I had no idea how beautiful and beneficial it could be to, on some levels, rental income is passive income. And wow, to be able to get a paycheck. I mean, here we are, July 1st. I'm going to get a paycheck today for
Mhm.
whatever. I mean, that's what pastor is going to deny that and say that's not going to be helpful. However, I know they're out there, and through doing a lot of podcast research, market research for my own platform, I found as I'm asking a whole bunch of questions about, what are you struggling with in your business or ministry or your life or whatever, when it comes to, and they're all answering this from a ministry level thing. How do we disciple more people? How do we get more people to follow the Lord? Blah, blah, blah. All the answers that they're supposed to ask, or all the questions that they're supposed to ask. Inevitably, I slipped the money question in there, and I just kind of opened the can, and you wouldn't believe the look on these guys' faces. They're like, oh my gosh, if we could get that figured out, it would be so helpful. So I guess my question, maybe you guys have encountered this along the way. Why is it that these guys don't feel the freedom to say, I need more money?
Les, that's a great question. I'm going to let you
I was going
tackle
to say, how long do we have?
that.
Yeah,
Go, Les.
there's several layers. And one of the things that we do, Kevin, is we start off with mindset for that very reason. And it's funny because to some who are a little more kind of impatient, it's like, yeah, I get all that, but how do I make money? But what they don't realize is that there's a good bit of the people that are listening right now that do have an issue with getting over the fact that is that okay? And we talk about people getting permission, and there's permission that we need from the Lord. And, John addressed that. There's permission that we think that we need from others. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but we certainly can give permission to ourselves. And sometimes that's where it has to start. And so one of the things is just what John said about maybe that's the way somebody was raised, and whether they had a ministry background or not, they just had an issue with a scarcity mindset of some sort. What we would call, that scarcity mindset, that there's so much of a pie to go around. And if we get a significant piece, then that means somebody else does it, that zero sum gain, so we have to get over that. But that's a big reason for it. I think if you were put people in a bucket, that'd be the biggest bucket, probably, is just a little bit of a scarcity mindset, or maybe a major scarcity mindset, to think that, for us to receive something, it means somebody else has got to do without. Or here's another one: church's time. People talk about, well, I don't want to do something on the church's time. What's that? You know what I mean? Because seriously, a Saturday afternoon wedding or funeral, that's not church's time or your time. That's just time that's spent in ministering to somebody that needs it. So there's a lot of that takes place too. So there's a lot of different layers to it, a lot of different potential reasons, but those are a couple of the major ones. John, you can pick it up from there.
Yeah, I want to go just a little deeper into what you said there, Les, on the last thing about the church's time. I think it goes deeper than that. It's almost this employee mindset that a lot of churches, certainly churches have, and I think sometimes pastors fall into that they view themselves as an employee of this church. And then therefore the thought of doing anything in addition to their pastoral work outside of quote unquote ministry, they feel like, I don't have permission, or I'm going to get in trouble. It's not okay for me to go do this. And so when Les talks about mindset, that's another area, like, hey, pastor, your church does not own you. Kevin, I was speaking at a conference a few years ago, and I had a pastor, speaking of rental property, come up to me, and he said, actually, it wasn't the pastor, I take that back. It was the deacon of a board that said, our pastor came to our board and asked permission. He and his wife owned another house, and he was asking us if it was okay with us if they rented out their home, for extra income. And he was kind of applauding him and the board for, being so gracious to allow their pastor to own a piece of rental property. And I called him out right there in front of the whole group. I did it politely, but I just said, let's think about the culture that you're talking about there. In what place does a grown man have to come and ask permission to take a piece of property that he owns,
his house already,
his house that he's putting into the market to rent out, and he needs your permission to know that he's getting X amount of dollars a month for something? Like, it just highlights that mindset that's so flawed in the church. And so I think to your original question, Kevin, yeah, there's maybe one other thing I would add to that is, this label that some may call the prosperity gospel, the health and wealth gospel. Like, Les and I don't subscribe to that. We view it as an extreme, maybe on one side of a ditch, maybe to stay out of. But for every Christian that's in that ditch, I'm telling you, there's 10 on the other side of the road stuck in the other ditch where they've come to view poverty and scarcity as a virtue. And I run into that all the time in these Facebook groups with pastors. And I think that here's the reality. I think that there are the majority are suffering in silence. And there's a few outspoken Pharisees that keep beating the drum anytime someone has the audacity to bring up the subject of money. You're inevitably someone's going to hit you with the verse, you can't serve God and mammon.
Right.
And it's like, that's not what Jesus was not making the point that a pastor needs to be broke and cannot have an additional stream of revenue beyond what the church is able to pay them. It just frustrates me to no end. So I guess Les and I, like we say all the time with EntrePastors, we're not trying to convince anybody. Like, I'm not trying to twist your arm into thriving financially. If you want to argue for your right to be broke, go right ahead, stay broke. We're here for those pastors that are struggling in silence, feeling guilty for the fact that they even have the audacity to think that it would be kind of nice to be able to provide a nice Christmas for their family or pay the heating bill,
And we don't mind. We speak pretty frankly and bluntly with people when we feel like we need to. But in this particular regard, when someone wants to do the kinds of things you're talking about, but are just struggling with it being okay, we definitely lean into that and can help them out, because to a degree, we've felt it, thought it, and maybe even participated in it. Another part of that, John, and we don't talk about this too much, but it's true, is that, as leaders, we want to see ourselves as pretty progressive and willing to lead and change and try new things. But the reality of it is that often the church lags way behind in different things that culturally, mindsets shift to a degree. And so there are some things that we want to stick to our guns with when it has to do with something that's biblical, but there's a lot extra as well. And, it wasn't up until a few years ago, for a corporate, when people worked for when they were company men and women, moonlighting, as it was called, for lack of a better term, was really frowned upon. It was a fireable defense for people that were employees, and they get put in there whatever 40 to 60 hours, and that was it. And in a lot of people's contracts, it was or personnel manual, it was forbidden to do that. And while that was the old economy, that was before online stuff, that was certainly before the internet, before a global economy like we have now. And now it's such that not only is it allowed, now it's almost necessary, and not quite, you choose your lifestyle. But I can remember several years ago, John, visited in Hawaii with my wife, and everybody that we ran into, it looked like had 2 or 3 jobs, and they kind of bragged about it. Like, to live here, you have to have a couple of jobs. I mean, somebody have a white collar corporate thing, and then at night they were a tour bus driver or something.
Sure.
Literally, we ran into people like that. And that's pretty much the way it is everywhere now, at least in the US.
Well, unless one thing I want to add to what you're saying about the corporate contract where maybe moonlighting is forbidden. I understand if a couple things I want to say about that. Maybe I understand if an employee has actually signed said contract and that expectation is clearly spelled out. But in that case, I'm almost 100% certain that company is providing above average, health benefits and retirement and salary that is livable to where they're able to say and maybe dictate, hey, we don't want you doing other stuff outside, especially if it's in the realm of the same thing we're doing. With pastoring, here's where I really take beef with a church that is asking their pastor to make it on a $40,000 salary with no retirement. And most likely that pastor has followed the advice of opting out of Social Security, and health insurance may or may not really be provided. And now then the church wants to speak into that and go, no, you're our full-time pastor. Yeah. That means you don't do anything else except sit in the office and wait for my phone call. I have a real problem with that church. I think that's an abusive, really toxic scenario when you stop and think about it. So it's not an apples to apples comparison in my mind. it's similar principle maybe, but not an apples to apples comparison, because it's like, hey,
Yeah,
church,
but even that doesn't. Yeah, but even that doesn't exist in the new economy.
sure, I agree with
Hardly
you.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Kevin, do you have any follow-up? Otherwise, I have a question I want to hit you, but I know Les and I ran way deep with your question there. So any follow-ups there?
No, I mean, I see it everywhere. And honestly, I see some of the stuff I'm watching. My wife is part of a like pastor's wife Facebook group, which those things are always so much more telling than the pastor's side, because they just don't say anything. But you see these catastrophic stories. Like she told me one yesterday as we were on our way to church, but the story about like, hey, my husband gets paid $85 a week to be the pastor, and we're part of a parsonage. We live in the parsonage, and this was the story. This was the actual story. They told us that they didn't agree with something that we were doing, and they asked for his resignation effective immediately. And we're supposed to move out of the parsonage by Monday. That would be today. Like,
Wow.
how on earth is that justifiable? How do they think that this is like,
Toxic.
where is it the fact that these are real people who have real lives, and regardless of the fact that we might not see eye to eye, and the business world treats people better than these kind of things outside of a ministry context altogether. Like, what is wrong with church these days? And I don't mean to lump everything all together, because it's not all the same. But what in the world is happening in our culture today that's unjustifiable to take care of people at just a basic human level?
Yeah. I don't claim to have the answer on that, but other than it just highlights the principles of, oftentimes some of us who are in leadership roles in the church really need to question the direction that we're leading in. And we're supposed to be setting the tone and the pace for loving others and leading in that. And like I said earlier, I say it tongue in cheek, like when I mentioned like these pastor groups sometimes are some of the meanest corners of the internet. We need to do some self-policing, right? As men and women serving in those roles, like we can be kind of ugly at times. And I hope what you're describing is the exception, but the truth is, Les and I have heard countless stories like that of just toxic, abusive relationships where pastors are suffering. Having said that, I want to be fair to say there's countless stories of very generous and healthy churches, church settings. So we're not here to trash the church. But we are here to stand up for pastors that are in those types of scenarios, and when there's so much healthier and life-giving way available to you to be obedient to God's calling in your life, and to serve him.
I think honestly, my comment about it isn't so much to say about the church. It's really about the pastor, because the pastor has the obligation and the ability to say, my family's worth more than this, and I'm not going to submit to something, an expectation that is unrealistic. Like, he has the ability to say, listen, enough is enough. I'm worth more. I can do better. Let's ask a new question, expect a new answer, something like that.
So let's lean into that. You say, ask a new question. Earlier, I wrote down, where does our money come from? Is there another question, or do you have more questions, or is that the big question that you're leaning into? Give me an example of a better question.
Sure. And it a little bit ambiguous in nature, but now that I am into this world of like business coaching, pastoral coaching, those kind of things, I've learned how to do that with some precision, I think. But my thesis for life became, your future is defined by the questions that you're willing to answer. The problem is that we don't really answer very large questions. They just are pretty base level. And honestly, the other problem I see with people is that as you start pressing them with harder questions, you get these brick wall barriers that they put up right in front of you, like this. I always tell people, if we're going to work together, there's two phrases that you can say that I will fire you for, and we're not working together anymore. I can't, and I don't know. Because as soon as you say, I don't know, you're saying, I'm not even willing to engage in figuring it out. So I don't know. And as many times as they say, I don't know, they're just building that wall deeper and thicker and more surrounding themselves. You cannot say, I don't know. It has to come down to a spot of like, okay, if it's a problem, then the Lord has a solution for you in it. And we're going to find it. You just have to have the tenacity to keep powering through. So let's ask a new question. Let's ask a new angle. Let's pursue on it a little bit more. And I think, deep down, the people at their core, they know what they need to answer. They just have to have the toughness to stick with it and press into some of the difficulty of, obscurity. Clarity, the quest for clarity is probably the single hardest thing that we can do in life today. What do you want? And what does
That's a
that
good
look
question. I've
like?
got some I'll offer up. So I love that we pose that question to our community often. What do you want? And immediately address the limiting beliefs that are going to come up with that, the spiritual sounding voices that rise up from within. Go, well, it doesn't matter what I want. It's like, no, actually, God says if we delight ourselves in the Lord, He will give us the desires of our heart. So, what are the desires of your heart? What do you want? That's a really fair question. And I believe it has some clues about what maybe God's purpose and shape for your life might look like if you get honest about answering that question. What do I want? I'll offer up a few others. And these are just, I'm shooting from the hip on this, so I have not given a lot of thought. But does pastoring have to look like this? And that this is your current model, your current scenario. Is this what the church is supposed to look like? We're probably not going to answer that question in all its conclusivity today on this podcast conversation. But is it possible that the Church of Jesus Christ has way more permission to adapt to an ever-changing world and culture? I'm not talking about the messages that we preach and the timeless truth that we hold dear, but does the church have permission to change methodologies and the ways that we approach things? I would contend simple answer is yes. But what does that look like for you? Does my church need to look like every other church in town? Or is there a different way that I could be obedient to the calling that God has placed upon my life and still be pastoring and still be shepherding and doing it in a different context or in an additional context? Like these are, I'm just, machine gunning out some questions here that say, I think you start
100%.
leaning into those questions, it's going to take you to a healthier place. Maybe let me wrap up with this one, not wrap up the whole thing, but just take a breath with this last question. Here's a question that ruined me in ministry. And it came from Francis Chan years ago in his book, Letters to the Church. His opening statement, as I recall, is a question somewhere early in the first chapter of that book is, if all we had to build our churches upon was the writings of the New Testament and nothing was handed to us in terms of the model that we've been given, like, would we look at the New Testament and then build the systems that we currently have? And it's like, for me, that was a haunting question when I was 100% dependent on a church for my income, because I knew deep in my gut the answer is no. I wouldn't look at this and go, yep, we built it. Like, no, we've got a lot of things here. They're not all wrong necessarily, but this doesn't look like that on many levels. And yet my income's totally tied to this other thing over here. So that wrecked me, man. So you got to be careful asking those questions, Kevin.
So I think to comment on that before we move on, but I think it really comes down to expectation. I think the expectation that I see a lot of pastors pursue is that paycheck and purpose have to come from the same place. And they're not willing to expand a new mentality. I mean, how do you justify that, or how you reason with that? Like, it's the church planner that I talk to that's like, I can't wait to get to the spot where this is my full-time income, or this is the only place I have to focus on. And I think that's an excuse. I think the purpose can be the movement, the ministry. I'm not sure that your paycheck has to come from there. And I think there's a freeing nature in it. And to be honest with you, I was disillusioned, man. When I got outside the walls of the confines of the paycheck of the church and started interacting with the business community, I found a new group of friends that I never even knew existed. I found a new connection, or a new perspective on a relationship with God that I was ignorant to. And all because, we're living life in the confines of my church office.
So say more about that. What I'm hearing you say, I'll say it in my own words, and then I want you to go deeper into that. Once you got out of the church bubble and you got into the quote unquote real world, the marketplace, the life outside of this little bubble we call the church, at first you found yourself a little bit ill-equipped and out of your element in that space. Now you've found it to be a great place. Again, these are my words. I'm reading between the lines, but say more about that.
Man, I met with a guy the other day, a pastor, in my quest to meet as many pastors as I can. And we're having coffee down here at this local coffee shop. And he asked me, he's like, what do you think I should be doing as a pastor? And I said, you know what, bro? Hands down, you should be going to all the chamber events in your town, because honestly, I've been to almost all of them. Anything that's free, I'm going to it. I've never met a pastor.
Mm.
Not one single time have I met a pastor in the business community where all these business people that represent all the businesses in the community, where is the representation of the church? And inside that context, man, I found a whole lot of new friends, a whole lot of new people that still need the same hope that we offer in the church on Sunday and through the message of the cross and all those things. And they just need to know there's a relatable connection that they can have.
Can I vent for a minute, Kevin? I got to say something.
Man, take it away.
In these pastor groups I hang out in, I sense a resistance to the business community or anything business related. Like pastors are totally fine getting free stuff given to them. The minute they smell that, hey, there might be an offer attached to this thing, they're going to come at you with both barrels as if it's a bad thing for someone to receive financial compensation for the services they provide. And so here's my irritation with that. I sense much of the time from pastors a resistance to the business community until this special time in the service each week that we call the offering. All of a sudden, they're quite okay for the business community to step up with their checkbooks. The rest of the week, they kind of have an annoyance or an irritation or a dismissive nature to the world of business and again, I'm painting with a broad brush. There's a lot of exceptions. We've interviewed hundreds of them on this podcast, but by and large, there is an ignorance about the business world and how business works, and they're just very disconnected from that. And I think it's sad. I think that there's a great opportunity not only for pastors themselves to be engaging the marketplace, but also showing the business community how they too can be using their businesses as a frontline tip of the spear ministry opportunity for the kingdom, because they're in it every day. They're seeing the market every single day. They're seeing the community coming through the doors of their businesses or interacting with the services that they provide. And I just think the church is missing it big time when it comes to pastors recognizing and engaging the business community. So thank you for letting me get that off my chest. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's good.
Hey, Kevin, talk
sir.
more, if you would. You've talked about, the rental income and you've mentioned a couple of things, but talk to us more about your platform and what you're building and sort of who your listeners are as well, since we're sort of trading this interview back and forth a little bit.
Yes, 100%. So I've taken a kind of a dual approach to business today. I'm working with business owners to help them press through the leadership tensions. In fact, I just started working with a farmer the other day, a couple weeks back. A farmer hired me to help him wrestle through some of the tensions of, development and succession, and how do I handle business when it comes to my family and my legacy. And I am absolutely loving that zone, just to help these guys. What I've found is that I loved preaching a service on Sunday. My church had about 400 or 500 that we would gather on every Sunday, and I love that. And I, 2 sermons too. I was doing all that stuff, but I detested the idea of all these people come up to me after the service saying, "Hey, that was a good talk." And I was like, "Man, go prove it. Go out of here and actually do something with it, change your life with it." And so, man, to sit across from one person who's going to take the same word I mentioned on Sunday and actually apply it and do something with it, I'll take that all day long.
Yeah.
So I get to do that. But it took me about a year. I had a little bit of a bitterness coming out of the church world. And I really told people I'm just going to do business from now on. After about a year, I kind of sensed the Lord saying, "Hey, I want you to come back over here, and I want you to work with some pastors on some of these leadership issues," because my language was that I left a toxic leadership culture. Well, if that's what I saw, then it also, I feel like, becomes an obligation for me to help correct that in other places that are kind of tolerating the same problem. So that's what I've done is I've put together some workshop type material to be able to help level up leadership of pastors. At the same time, John, I echo some of your words here, because I'm seeing kind of a resistance and arrogance from some of these guys saying, I don't need what you have. I don't want to learn this. Don't rock my boat. It's going fine just the way it is. And I don't know whether it's a fear or whether it's a pride or what the case may be, I'm just trying to be faithful to what the Lord is kind of putting in front of me. Kind of the same as you. I see you making these Facebook posts all the time, and inevitably there's that one person that's going to come back with that instant jab about how dare you talk about money. And your response is just, man, I'm just trying to help the people who are in it, who are wrestling through it. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to connect with pastors who want to find, is there a better way to do this? Is there an easier way to connect people with the heart of the gospel while at the same time answering the money question that their family is asking or their wife is asking, and they're trying to figure out, how do I deal with this? Or they're procrastinating on it. They're kicking it down the field and just hoping that something's going to give way and it's going to be better for them in the long run. So
Yeah,
that's a long answer to that question.
I'm going to offer up some coaching that you didn't ask for, but it's more for the sake of our audience than for you, Kevin. And I'm saying this super gently. We say it, including myself and Les, we say this as well all the time, but we try to be careful about it. And I just heard you say it, like you, with your words, created this dichotomy of like, I'm doing this business thing over here, but then God's pulling me back to ministry. And I totally know what you mean. Pastors, we say it all the time about I'm in ministry or I'm out of ministry. I understand what that means. But one of the things we try to do in helping pastors is really help them see, what if there's really not a dichotomy there? And every pastor is going to get this question right on the test. We all know the test answer to the question is that business is ministry. Like it's all ministry when it's submitted to the authority and the kingdom of Jesus. But a lot of times we still think in that duality of like, I have this life over here that's kind of me in the business world, and then I have this life over here that's me in ministry. And more, I just want pastors to see that there is no distinction between those two. Because here's the thing, Kevin, you're like, God's calling upon your life didn't quit when you left a toxic environment at church. Like his calling never, he wasn't frantically panicking in heaven going, what am I going to do? His calling is still there, and he knows you're going to walk in it. He knows if you're faithful to him, wherever you go, that calling is going to be there, and he's going to put people in your path for ministry to take place. So one of the questions we ask a lot of times in our business builders community that we meet with each week, these are pastors that are just in the process of launching some kind of business of their own in the marketplace. And we don't ask it every week, every month when we meet one of those. We meet every week, but once a month, one of the focuses of the call is kind of a check-in of all of our members. And one of the questions that we ask, and I'm contemplating stopping asking this question because it always goes on too long. But the question is, in what ways has God used my business as a platform for ministry in the past month? And it's like these guys just have endless opportunities and like examples.
Always a story.
Yeah, there's always a story of like how through my business endeavor, I had this ministry conversation. The reason the question is there, though, coming full circle, is back to that mindset. I want our pastors to recognize you are not leaving ministry to go out and do your handyman business. You're not leaving ministry to go coach business owners. You're not leaving your ministry to go do this commercial cleaning job over here. Like it's all ministry. So anyway, don't like just consider
because they're looking for it, right? Their heart hasn't changed and they're looking for it. Is it ministry for everybody? No, because they're not looking for it as much as these guys are. It's like, oh, hey, there's an open door right there. I'm going to go in and walk through it.
That's good stuff.
So talk to me for just a minute to, unveil a little bit more of what EntrePastors is and how are you connecting with pastors to answer some of that entrepreneurial question that they're asking?
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Simply put, EntrePastors is a platform that Les and I launched 2.5 years ago now, coming up on 3 years actually this fall, right, Les? So,
yep.
So it's a platform. We have a free podcast that we do every week, and we're just trying to celebrate and create a community where pastors can celebrate the fact that they're not broke. Most pastors can't walk into their church this Sunday and celebrate the fact that they just had, the biggest deal go down in their business, or they just acquired a new property for rental. Like most church people just don't have that framework to applaud that and go, that is awesome, pastor. We want to create that community where it's okay to celebrate the fact that you're not starving and broke and living in pastoral poverty. So we've got the free podcast, but then beyond that, we do have a few levels of a membership community that people can be a part of. Our biggest one right now is what we call our business builders group. And we are walking alongside of pastors who are launching a business. We don't have a one size fits all approach. And we've been accused of that a lot of times in these pastor groups. I get accused of trying to sell some multi-level marketing thing that couldn't be further from the truth. We want to help you discover how God has uniquely wired and shaped you. We want to help you figure out how you can transfer the skill set that you've been honing over the years in pastoral ministry out into the marketplace, because all of those skills are transferable to the marketplace. So what would be a good business for you? What would be a way that you could show up, provide a service in the marketplace that people would be willing to pay for, and you can solve problems for other people using your skill set? So we've got pastors launching all kinds of different business endeavors in the marketplace, and we're there to encourage them, to support them. We have kind of a basic checklist of the things you do to get a business off the ground, but then the details are different from one person to the next. But our role as Les and I, we're coaches, we're encouragers, we're mentors. We're there to we're a little bit further down the path, and we can illuminate some of the landmines to avoid. We can help you get further faster. And that's what we do in our EntrePastors Business Builders community. Is we meet once a week. Beautiful. We encourage those guys, and it's a relatively low investment. I mean, it's $99 a month. And our challenge to our pastors is like, man, in very short order, we want to see you paying for that out of new revenue that's being created from your business. Like, we don't want this to be a burden for you. We understand that for most pastors, $99 a month in their current financial situation is not easy. And so we want to help you get to the place where that's not a challenge. And we're doing that. And we're excited about where that's going. We also have a mastermind for a little bit more pastors that are a little bit further down the road in their businesses. And, it's a little bit higher investment, but where we really are seeing traction is with those guys that are just getting started, kind of walking them through those baby steps that are required to move into a place where you're starting a business and getting new income.
I love it. That's so helpful, beneficial. That's good.
I just had one more question for you. Well, two, Kevin, I want you to give any clear call to action for our community if people wanted to follow you or connect with you. But before that, let's just have a brief conversation about the future of the church, because I know when you and I first met, we talked a little bit about this. And when you started this conversation today, when we started this interview, you were talking about, how you see things in this current cycle. Like, it's just going to continue down this road. We both see this very similarly, even though we don't claim to know the future. The reality is we believe that it's going to continue to be a difficult situation for pastors under this old model of receiving 100% of their income from the church. So if you were able to put on your futuristic lenses and look out, 10 years into the future, like, what do you see coming in the church world? And for pastors, I'd love to hear just your thoughts. We won't hold you to it. But what are you thinking today?
Yeah, sure. So I had a great interview a couple weeks back with Greg Atkinson, and who also runs kind of an Entre idea. I think his is called Entre Church. And he's done some extensive research among pastors, churches, whatever. And his numbers are, there's over 1 million pastors today that are bivocational and increasing in America. That's only in America. And obviously, that's not going to stop. The trend, it just can't keep up. Inflation is going so far, so fast, that it's just unimaginable for the church to be able to keep up with what it costs to be able to keep a full-time staff or a full-time pastor or whatever. So do we continue hoping that it's going to get better and that it can stay this way? Or is it time for a pastor to ask a new question? Because the church isn't going to ask it. It's just going to be like, hey, we can't pay you anymore. And what now? We've heard all those stories way too often. So let's get to the spot where we can ask a new question and give some new ideas. I think it's not for lack of desire that maybe these guys don't have it, but maybe it's a lack of idea. Maybe they need to know some ideas about what is possible. I never knew that I could buy or have a rental property. No offense to him, but I was kind of plagued on the Dave Ramsey mentality that I've got to be able, if I'm going to have a rental property, I got to have my primary one paid off first. And then I realized that, wow, there's a way to do this. And so I got my rental property by taking money from this guy and giving it to that guy. And I get my house in the middle. And after all the smoke's cleared, I have a property that's paying me every month that I paid no money for. Like, you couldn't tell me that was an option back then. And so then if you can just kind of keep doing that on repeat, I did that with an RV. Today I'm in the process of throwing paperwork all around to do to acquire a property, a duplex that's already moving rent. And by all intents and purposes, I can't qualify for a mortgage today to save my life, but there is a way. And you just have to be able to ask the questions about what's the way.
Yeah.
So
And
let's
the
help
way
some
you're not
pastors
talking
find
about
the way.
robbing a bank, right? You're talking about like legal, moral ways of just the different financial options. We won't get all deep
Yeah.
into the weeds of that, but as you learn that your point is that you're making, you just got to learn and get educated and learn to think a little differently, and some new opportunities will start to appear.
So let me just go back to what I've already said. Your future is defined by the questions you're willing to answer. So the question can become, what can I do to increase my income? Or what can I do to use some of my free time to be able to whatever? And then the excuses come. I have no free time. Really?
Mhm.
Let's figure out how much free time you have and
Yeah.
see what, it just some good coaching can really help people get along the way and press into these things. If left to ourselves, we will not change anything. We will stay as conformed as the day is long. But if we can get to someone who can stretch us farther and faster and to see some new things, we can really bring some change to our families and to our churches and everything that goes along with it. My statement is this: that as leadership improves, everything else improves along with it. You want to become a better pastor? Start answering this question, and you'll become a better pastor in the process.
Yeah, that's good. Well, man, Kevin, this has been fun. As time has flown by, I've got a bunch of other topics I'd love to visit with you about. But
All right.
why don't we sign off for this episode anyway by saying, if someone wanted to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for us to get them connected to you?
For sure. Probably just my website. It's just pastorsthriving.com. Try to keep this short, simple, and to the point. And from there, I always start with like, let's do some discovery call type stuff. I I, I hate the connotation that sends. I want to just have a virtual coffee. Let's sit down and have a coffee together, man. And I want to hear about the story of your life. What's going on? What are your celebrating moments? Where are your struggling moments? And let's just collaborate together for a minute. Love to do that. And tell me, guys, how do people get connected with you?
Yeah, just simply go to EntrePastors.com. We do have a free get started guide that we offer. And if someone's listening to this going, man, this all sounds amazing, I have no idea where to even begin, we have a free download. It's called, if you just go to EntrePastors.com/start, you can download your free PDF. And yeah, we'd love to be there to encourage any pastors. We'll encourage our guys to listen to your podcast, and would love it if some of yours checked out the EntrePastors podcast. We'd be happy to serve in any way that we can.
So good. This has been great, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.